Hello, hello out there. Hi, so happy you're here. There are a ton of you, and that's great news for us, and hopefully great news for you too. I'm Lenore Skenazy. I'm president of Let Grow, the nonprofit that promotes childhood independence. Yeah, you can hear me, right? Oh, being live streamed. Got it. And I'm also the founder of the Free Range Kids Movement. And today is actually our very first Let Grow webinar. We're starting with a bang. It might actually be all downhill from here because we have this amazing panel today, panel of two, that is. We have Jonathan Haidt here. He is an NYU professor of business, but you probably know him as the co-author of The Coddling of the American Mind. There you go. Huge bestseller, changing the world. It's probably in a million languages. I forgot to ask. But he is here today with Samantha Boardman, who is like everything. Okay, she's a psychiatrist, which means she's a medical doctor. She's a professor of psychiatry, and now she is a newbie author of this book, Everyday Vitality. And you'll see that the subtitle here is Turning Stress into Strength, which I think of as like, you know how they take like the old grease from the French fries and they turn it into gasoline? I think of it like that, strangely enough, because stress is something we all have a ton of. We don't want it. It's there. It's yucky. But she has figured out a way to really make it into something that we can use. And I can vouch for this myself, because as I was reading the book, and I can't even show you how much is underlined here. It's like everything is starred and exclamation points. But I was about halfway through the book thinking that she has a really great point, which is that you can't just think about things and worry about them. You actually have to do something. You have to take action. And so I was walking down my block and I passed my friend's apartment and I really thought, like, what would Samantha do? And I forced myself, it was like Samantha pushing me there. And I spontaneously rang her bell. I rang a friend's bell. Sorry. It's what you hope doesn't happen in a webinar. Anyways, I rang her bell, which is something I haven't done since I was like 8, asking if Betsy could come out and play. And my friend was home. There were no Barbies involved. We weren't really playing. We had tea, middle-aged. But it really did make me rethink how to connect with people and the world and my worries. And so you could say I'm not just a presenter, I'm also a client. And I'm also really proud today to say that I am a co-board member with Samantha now, because as of today, this is our big announcement. Samantha Boardman is joining our board. And I took a lot of time to convince myself not to make a pun, but just suffice to say, our Boardman on the board. I forgot that I also have to take us through the housekeeping of today's event, which is very, very simple. You've been to a lot of these. Sam and John are going to talk for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And after that, we're going to take your questions in the little Q&A button down there. It's not the hand raising thing, it's the Q&A button. And also, we're recording this event. So in a day or two, we'll send you a link. And we will also have a link available on our site that you can share. I have to say that this is the precise moment that we should be having this conversation, because I got an alert yesterday that the Oxford English Dictionary released the word of the year according to kids. And I don't know if you guys saw this yet, Sam or John, but it was, they asked 8,000 children what word best described their I don't know, well-being for the past year. And these were kids from age 7 to 14. And the word of the year was not boredom. It was not remote. It was not mom. It was anxiety. And Let Grow exists to try to give kids enough independence that it provides them a sort of natural immunity to anxiety, because anxiety is when you're afraid of doing things, and Let Grow pushes kids to do more on their own and pushes parents to let them. And so that's hard to do in a culture that keeps telling us that everything and everyone is out to get our kids. And so Sam and John are here today to discuss how you can be driven a little less crazy by the parenting culture and drive your kids a little less crazy too. So John, I'll have you take it from here.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Lenore. I'm not just a fellow board member, I'm also a client of yours, because it was because I met you soon after my wife and I moved to New York City and we read Free Range Kids that we bit the bullet and did the hard, anxious thing of letting our kids do errands in the neighborhood and walk to school in 4th grade. And it's the most amazing thing, how anxious you are as a parent And you see the little dot crossing the street. Okay, yes, we gave them ways to track, including, and you don't believe in that. That's a disagreement. All right, but leaving that aside, once you see them actually crossing 7th Avenue or whatever and making it to school, by the 3rd day they do it, and you realize, yeah, we all did that when we were in 2nd or 3rd grade. So thank you, Lenore, for starting this movement, for starting Let Grow. And it is an incredible honor to be on this board with you and to welcome Samantha, who is as distinguished, as brilliant, as relevant to our time. And so I thought what I would do, I'll lead the discussion with Samantha. I thought I would sort of just set the big picture of where we are in a variety of ways, and then introduce Samantha and try to have a conversation that is maximally beneficial to the audience before we take their questions. So in my own background here, I'm a social psychologist. I study morality. I got dragged into this side project, nothing to do with my research, by Greg Lukianoff, who noticed that something weird is happening with college students in 2014. It wasn't there in 2012. It was anxiety. It was an incredible fragility that could be triggered by words, books, speakers. And we didn't understand it. And we thought it was college students. Like, what is college doing to make kids so anxious, we thought. And so we wrote a whole article called The Coddling of the American Mind, where we thought it was that colleges were doing something. And they sort of were, but actually the problem was much bigger. It turns out American kids began to get really anxious in 2013. The graphs, the data, I mean, it's sort of level throughout the millennial generation. And once we get Gen Z, that is kids born in 1996 or 1997 or later, when they reach their early teen years, boom, the levels of anxiety and depression go shooting up. That starts pretty sharply in 2013. Greg and I then expand our Atlantic article into a book, also called The Coddling of the American Mind. We do a lot more research, and we discover, or we make the case that there are 2 big causes of this national catastrophe of mental health. It's also in Canada, the UK, it's in all the English-speaking countries. And there are 2 main causes. And we believe the number 1 cause is the Let Grow problem. That is, we've deprived kids of the basic experiences they need to develop their personhood, their agency, their autonomy, their competence, which is unsupervised free play, especially outdoors with other kids, and no coaches, no parents, just normal play. And we deprived kids of that long before, beginning in the 1990s especially. And the second cause, I believe, is that we sort of put them all, or let them all, be dragged onto social media around 2011, 2012 is when American teens went from mostly not being on it every day to basically, they said, let's take all our social life, all the stuff we did for thousands of years, let's put it all on a platform and just, connect by typing. And so that all started around 2012, and then boom, the numbers go up in 2013. So that's where we were before COVID, and the numbers keep going up and up and up. And by 2019, it's really clear we have a mental health catastrophe. We have a whole generation that has been made anxious and fragile. This is a whole generation that was starving for play, for social connections, and they were overdosing on social media and stranger danger. And then COVID hits, and what do? We say, hey, how about if you have 90% less play and you have 90% less in-person social interaction? Let's all do social distancing. So let's take away the things you most needed, cut it to 0. And how about we give you a lot more social media time and a lot more stranger danger? Stranger danger is so severe that it's actually other human danger. If you see a person's mouth, you're in danger. If a person comes close to you, you're in danger. If a person touches a pencil and you touch it, you're in danger. I mean, this is insanity, what we did to the kids. And guess what? The unbelievably high levels of anxiety and depression and fragility, suicide attempts, self-harm, all that stuff that was at historically unprecedented levels in 2019 has gone way, way up. Many of you saw the New York Times article, the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. Actually, I'll just put this in the chat. I may put a few things in the chat, and we will send out a link. We'll send out an email to everyone on this call afterwards. So don't worry if you missed things in the chat. We'll send out an email with all the links that we send. So only in the last month has there been a growing awareness in the United States that while of course COVID was a global disaster and it killed many, many people, especially the elderly, the death toll is, I shouldn't say unprecedented because there have been worse plagues, but in recent times, unprecedented. But it was a pandemic mostly of older people. It largely spared the kids. And what we're finally realizing, beginning with the Surgeon General's report, I think, is that our COVID restrictions were really, really harsh on the kids and largely unnecessarily harsh. So now there's as Lenore said, we're talking about this perfect time. We're all rethinking, what have we done to the kids and how can we undo this? To speak on that, we again are so fortunate to have Samantha Boardman. Lenore gave her basic bio. I'll just add that Samantha is a mother of two kids, two teenagers, a boy in 10th grade, a girl in 8th grade, I think are the grades, and which are basically the same as my kids. She got her BA from Harvard, her medical degree from Cornell. And then after that, she got the degree that is most relevant for today. She got a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. I teach in that program 1 or 2 days a year. And so I was one of the visiting professors in 2012. That's where I met Samantha, just as she was finishing her degree. And then we got to know each other in New York City. And Samantha has this amazing convening power. She just brings together interesting people around her large dining room table for these fantastic conversations. So this is my introduction to Samantha. Now, Sam, you describe yourself as a positive psychiatrist committed to fixing what's wrong and building what's strong. I love that. And here, I'll put this in the chat. This is the link to your website, positiveprescription.com. I Googled positive psychiatry. It gets only 46,000 hits. I Googled positive psychology. It gets 8.6 million hits. So positive psychiatry is a very new field. It seems the first inklings of it were 2013. So you got into it at the very, very beginning of the field. So my first question to you, Sam, is tell us what positive psychiatry is, but do it in the form of a story, namely your story, namely how did you become a positive psychiatrist?
Thank you, John. Thanks, Lenore. I'm super excited to be here and to be chatting with everyone. So I found positive psychology in 2012. And I'll tell you, when I'd been in medical school, I was trained really well to look for anything that could possibly go wrong in the body. I percussed lungs, auscultated abdomens, palpated prostates, anything, looking for signs and symptoms of illness. And in psychiatry residency, I did the same thing. I was taught to look for anything that could go wrong, possibly in the mind. And my focus was always on reducing symptoms, bringing somebody back to baseline, making somebody less sick. And I thought I was pretty good at psychiatry. I was good at misery and making people feel a little bit less badly. And that had been my goal. And then I was fired by a patient I had been seeing for a couple of months. And she was sort of overwhelmed with a lot of stressors. She was stressed out with her family, with her partner. And one day she just came into my office and said, you know what, Dr. Boardman, sometimes I just dread coming here. All we ever do is focus on what's wrong with me. We never talk about anything else. Sometimes I'm even having a good day and I have to think, what can I complain about? And she was right. I had been so laser focused on her problems and what was wrong and trying to sort of dial them down, and not really focusing enough on sort of what made it like sort of her life worthwhile and what she enjoyed doing. And I ended up going back to school to study applied positive psychology. It was really about sort of the science of optimal human functioning. And it was the opposite of everything I learned in medical school. We studied optimism, we studied resilience, we studied post-traumatic growth. That's where I met you, John. And it was really eye-opening. And now I bring this into my practice today, into positive psychiatry, not just looking for pathogenesis that I was doing for so long, which is the understanding and treatment of disease, but looking for salutogenesis, which is the creation of health, and helping patients find strength within their everyday stress and find wellness within illness.
That's beautiful. And there's so much cynicism around psychiatry and the pressures on them to be pill pushers and to focus on like mechanics under the hood. So it's so refreshing to hear about this turn in psychiatry and to hear that you're practicing the kind of psychiatry I think most of us would actually want to partake of, or if we are sending our kids to a psychiatrist, would want someone who really thinks about the whole person, the whole child. Okay, so we're gonna. I think we'll start with sort of the big picture of what you do and what you bring, especially what you bring in this book. What are the big ideas that if you read the book, you have, and then you can see the world in a new way, and you're more capable of dealing with the challenges of our time. So as I was reading the book, I'll raise the two that jump out at me, and then I'll ask you what you want to add. the two that jump out at me are vitality and stress. So why don't you tell us, given that it's in the title, Everyday Vitality, what do you mean by vitality? Where does it come from? How do you know if you have it?
Vitality was a word I never heard in medical school or psychiatry residency. And, it was something that to me was just an essential marker of well-being and really everyday well-being. And it's that psychological and also physical, experience of energy, of psychological readiness, that you're ready for anything. And Andrew Solomon, the psychologist, had said, the opposite of depression isn't happiness, it's vitality. And so what are these vitalizing experiences? What is it that we can do? And there were so many sort of myths, I think, that I try to address in the book. And one is that mental health is the absence of symptoms or any illness. And really trying to look at that as really being the presence of positive thoughts, feelings, and experiences. And where does vitality come from? And it really came from these three main sources. It was in connecting meaningfully with others, in contributing to something beyond yourself, and in challenging yourself in meaningful ways. And so what are these vitalizing experiences? Where are they every day? And I think there's a lot of messaging that you have to sort of go out and find yourself, or you've got to download or buy all these sort of self-help experiences. And I wanted to sort of, share this idea that vitality is in these everyday actions. It's in the actions we take, the connections we make, and really how we participate.
That's beautifully put, because I think a word that is on so many people's lips these days is just exhaustion. The first months of COVID, we were actually pretty vital. I mean, it was an amazing time, and everybody was trying to learn as much as they could. People were trying new things, and it was a scary time, but there was no lack of vitality in those first months. And now, as we enter the third year, it's this is what we all need. We all need that sense of waking up in the morning and being excited excited for the day. Okay, the second one is stress. Stress plays a big role in your book. How should people be thinking about stress?
Well, stress is just a big word, and it can mean so many different things. And I really wanted to distill that as well. And so often what we experience in everyday life, we'll just say, oh, I'm stressed out, or it's this huge cloud that's hovering over us. And what we know from research, it's not really stress per se, it's your perception of stress, right? So it's what you're experiencing, what your resources are, what you believe you have the ability to cope, and that you have, ways to rise to this challenge. And what are these buffering experiences? We know you're experiencing a ton of hassles, and people who do experience a lot of hassles in their everyday lives are much more likely to report depression or anxiety. But in the same ways, if they have these buffering experiences, the opposite of hassles, which is uplifts, you can create this buffer zone around you, and your perception of stressful experiences will be different. So again, it's not just the idea of, oh, I'm stressed out. It's your perception of stress, and that has to do with the resources available to you. And that is related to your vitality.
Okay, right. And that also then it relates to so much of Stoic wisdom. One thing I started doing early in COVID was reading Stoic writings in the mornings, because the world seemed to be going insane, and the Stoics are the best guide to how to live in a world that's gone insane. And so here at the opening of chapter 2 in The Coddling of the American Mind, The Untruth of Emotional Reasoning, we quote Epictetus: "What really frightens and dismays us is not external events themselves, but the way in which we think about them. It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance." So that's one of the most ancient and widespread insights. And you combine that with the idea of anti-fragility, that we actually need to encounter stress. Parents need to understand that stress is not bad. Stress is essential. Long-term chronic stress is bad. There's nothing good about a kid being anxious for weeks. That's terrible. But kids need a lot of short-term challenges and stressors, and that helps them deal with it afterwards. Okay, so those are the two. What would you add? Before we get into kids, what are the other big ideas in the book that you would want everyone to have in mind?
Just that notion as well of desirable difficulty, that sort of moment, that sweet spot one can find between your ability, that self-efficacy, and when you're stretching yourself, that when you're sort of thinking a little bit more expansively. And really another major point in the book is this idea that resilience is really commonplace. And I think we assume that resilience is something that either, maybe some lucky people are born with or not, or just somebody's waved a magic wand and that people are resilient or not. And I think what the research shows us is that we can be much more deliberate about our resilience, and by sort of doing things. And it usually entails an other orientation and an outer orientation. And that when we sort of have this combination of optimism and confidence in our coping styles and a challenge mindset, we're much more likely to be resilient. And also flexibility, that I think is also essential for what you're talking about, anti-fragility.
Right. So that's very much the theme of your book. Do things. Don't just sit there and ruminate. Do things with other people, or do things thinking about it from their perspective, that we are intensely social creatures. And you quote the wonderful maxim from Chris Peterson, positive psychology is the view that other people matter. Okay, desirable difficulty. Okay, so let's now turn this to parenting and to children. And let's keep in mind, at least, I'm compiling these reports. I'm compiling all the data. I'm so deep in all the graphs of what's happening and all the studies about causality. And I always have to remind myself that these are real kids. These are our kids. These are, many people on the call, their kids are having anxiety problems. And if your kids aren't, their friends sure are. So let's talk now about what all of this positive psychiatry, Let Grow, all of this stuff, how can this help us understand what's happening to kids, and then do better by them, help them to grow? So first, what is your view? I gave some numbers about how bad things are. Are you seeing anything in your practice? I guess you don't work with kids, but you have a lot of parents. What are you picking up about what's really happening to kids and parent-kid relationships?
That parents are tired, stressed, and bored. And that's the same, those words, I know Lenore introduced us with that word anxiety, that's been the word of the year, but also tired, stressed, and bored, I would say also captures that experience of many parents as well. And just overwhelmed, hands up in the air. And a lot of focus too on kind of what's wrong. And I think, again, like this concern around their kids, and this curiosity too around how can, around self-help and self-care for their kids. And I get a little worried sometimes that this overemphasis on self-care is sort of missing that bigger picture of other care, and how empowering that is, and how, one of the most important sort of buffers and mediators of people who are experiencing everyday stress is self-efficacy, as we know. And self-efficacy, that like ability to feel competent and confident around things. And we, both of us are big fans of self-determination theory, this idea that's really central to well-being, that we have these sort of this human need for sort of three things. One is autonomy, that sense that you have a say and agency over what you do. The second part of that is relatedness, that you are loved and that you feel loved. And a third part of that is competence, that you feel that you have mastery and sort of coping skills. And we know how unbelievably important it is to feel valued and to feel loved, but it's also essential to feel that you're adding value. And I think that is really the essence of meaning and what it feels to matter. And going back to that, the quote you said, other people matter. Mattering is, I think, having both, feeling valued, but also the confidence and the competence that you're also adding value.
Yeah, right. This theory, self-determination theory from DC and Ryan, which is really one of the most useful theories in the last 3 decades of psychology and psychiatry. Yeah, and I really want to undermine, and this is what Let Grow is so much about, it's autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And kids throughout history have been useful. They were economically useful. They did things. We relied on them. All over the world, at the age of 7, kids are old enough to take the cattle down to the stream for water. And we now don't think that they're old enough to walk to school until they're 11 or 12. So autonomy, competence, and relatedness, these are the things kids need. And maybe later when Lenore comes back on, maybe she'll talk about the Let Grow project. But this is, I think, the clearest medicine we have to offer at Let Grow is a sort of a structured way to just, let kids propose things that they think they can do on their own, and then they do it on their own. And they, as you said, they feel useful. They've done something. They've satisfied their needs for competence and autonomy.
And what are those everyday ways, though, that we can give them that? What are the opportunities? If it's holding the door, if it's walking the dog, if it's, going to the store to buy some milk, all those, because I think a lot of us are mostly concerned about that relatedness piece, that sense of, are they loved? and then how do we also emphasize that sense of the competence and the autonomy piece in everyday ways? And when there's a lot of research around this. When kids are asked, what would be an effective way to get them to do homework more efficient, that they would be more committed to doing their homework. And, studies show that there's a couple ways you can do this. You could have a teacher or a well-meaning parent give advice, who may actually arguably really good advice about how to do that. Or you could ask a 7th grade student to give advice to a 5th grade student about how, they could work more effectively and do their homework, and be on time with it. And that those kids who receive this wisdom from a 7th grader actually are much more likely to receive it from the peer, the 7th grade's other student, than they would from a teacher or a parent. But also the one giving the advice, the one whose experience matters then to somebody else, they're also much more likely then to be more productive and more effective in doing their own homework. And I think we often forget how wonderful students can be for one another, how much that kind of peer-to-peer information, even in talking to peers, like one-on-one, getting advice from somebody, and the incredible resource that they are to each other, and instead of always having to turn to an adult, and how motivating that can be.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what they lost when they're home with their parents all day for the last 2 years. A quick question for you, maybe not quick, on gender differences and also social media. So first of all, are we, the data suggests that on many measures, girls have increased their rates of anxiety more than boys. On some, they're equal. Completed suicide, well, it goes back and forth on completed suicides. It's up for both. But are there gender differences that people should know about in, let's say, teen mental health? And what role do you think social media is playing in this?
I mean, I'm deeply concerned about social media, especially for young girls. It seems like it's having a deeper impact on their mental health. And I mean, you might know the answer to this, John. I've just seen a study saying that young girls are reporting, this was before the pandemic, boredom much more. And how is that related to their anxiety? And I mean, I would imagine that like boredom does, I think was probably fueling their anxiety, but just the self-comparison that kicks in, the perfectionism we're seeing in young women, they're perfectionists like in their achievement, in their social lives, and we're also seeing them expecting more perfection from those around them. And it so deeply concerns me about young girls, and especially below the age of 9th grade. I know you've got a lot to say about this too, about having access to all these different apps, especially Instagram.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I haven't heard that about boredom, but that would be amazing. If kids, they have so much new stuff coming into their eyes. They have the most incredible videos coming at them on YouTube and TikTok. A lot of them are entertaining and even educational, but yet they're more bored. I'm going to look into that. That is fascinating. It's also incredible that all over the world, Jean Twenge and I just published a paper on this, all over the world, rates of people reporting how lonely they are in school were stable from 2002 to 2012, some variations, but no net movement up or down from 2000 to 2012. In the 2 administrations of the PISA study since then, they've gotten more lonely at school. Now, this is astonishing. That this is the generation that was as hyper-connected more than ever has happened before. I mean, the technology comes in, you get kids hyper-connected, and what happens? They become lonely and bored. This is just stunning. So, all right, so that's something that
it relates also to, I mean, we're talking about that autonomy and competence and relatedness, and that pseudo relatedness that they're experiencing, right, through the sort of social media connections and pseudo interactions they're having, rather than that in-person interaction, even when they're texting with friends. That they're not, it's not genuine relatedness.
Right, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So if you're always seeing everyone else is together, and you see the snap map, everyone else is together, so I'm less related, and everyone else is doing these amazing things, and I'm not. I'm just sitting here scrolling. So yeah, I think we can use self-determination theory to understand how social media has actually hurt kids in ways that I had not been thinking of. That's so helpful. Thank you. Okay, so now let's turn to any specific advice for parents, given the various ideas we put out there, ideas that are developed in your book. What do you think parents should do as I'm going to go ahead and say, coming out of COVID, I do believe that Omicron is a phase change, getting us much closer to the endemic phase. Obviously, I'm not an expert in this, but I think this is a year when we could come out of COVID restrictions and get onto a sort of an endemic, let's live with it sort of thing. What advice do you have for parents if this does happen this year?
Well, I think there's so many things that we can do as parents that often involve sort of taking a step back. And we're talking right now about relatedness, and that being sort of part of like one of the three essential sort of human needs that we have. But as parents, though, what could we do to show that we care and provide what we call invisible support rather than always that overt support, that explicit support? So is it always saying, are you okay? Are you really okay? Are you sure you're okay? We can actually undermine a kid's sense of self. And again, sort of relating how we speak to kids. There's a lot of research out there on rumination. And that rumination is when you're sort of, you can ruminate yourself when you're sort of going over and over again a story in your own mind of why did I say that? Or, what's going to happen next? Or what's going on right now? When you're just sort of chewing your cud. It's almost like the ticker tape on the bottom of the TV of like what's going on in your mind, and you're going over something over and over again. And co-rumination is when you're doing it with someone else, like you're rehashing something, and you sort of know you're ruminating with a friend if you think, didn't we have this conversation before, and it sort of like feels like Groundhog Day. But a lot of parents do it with their kids, and it sort of can feel like it's an expression of care when you say like, oh, tell me what happened at school. Was that teacher mean to you again? Or was that now tell your mom, now tell your sister, now going over and over the same thing again and again. And one thing you can do is actually ask them to take some distance. And self-distancing is a technique that we know works for kids and for adults as well, is when you ask them to think, what would a fly on the wall say in this moment? Or what would you tell a friend? What kind of advice would you give to them in this moment? Or even think of somebody you admire. What might they do right now? Like, how would they think about this? And asking them to put a little bit of distance between their emotions and the description around it can give them perspective and also help them reconstrue it. And most importantly, take an action then around it. So kind of help move them forward rather than going over and over and over again with the same thing.
This is so helpful because as you talk, I'm envisioning, when we take our kids to the science museums and they always have the thing, you drop the penny and it goes around and around like the funnel, and it goes around for several minutes and it goes down. And that's like what rumination does, and especially co-rumination is you're helping the kid do that. So much of your advice is don't do that. Get out of yourself. Go do things. And I want to link it to what Lenore is always saying. It's all about kids need more experiences on their own. And Lenore always makes it clear, I believe in safety. I want kids to wear helmets, but they should then go out and ride the bike. And so linking that to what you said about taking a step back, we have to let our kids have these experiences, be there for them in a distant way, know that if they get in trouble, they can always come back to the secure base. But attachment theory is all about how kids don't learn on the secure base. They go out and have experiences which might even be frightening, and they return to the secure base. Okay, that is incredibly helpful. I hope people find that as what you just said as evocative as what I just took from it. Okay, let's see.
It's even reminding me, I think I just seen a study looking at how, small children who have like the smell of their mom, that they're actually much more open to a new experience. So it's just the presence of, to know that you're loved, that you have this support, but then also that you wanted them to try something new. And I sometimes advise parents even to say like, just you have your kids think of some, like maybe a bunch of people they admire under different circumstances. Like what would Michelle Obama do right now? Like what would John Haidt do right now? What would Lenore do right now? And it just can help you. It just takes the heat out of and the sting out of whatever you're feeling and helps you feel like, oh, maybe I can think a little bit more clearly. And I've always found it to be super helpful.
Well, that raises an interesting point. I know in your book, you talk about how you use Barbara Walters as your person to, like she was, a great speaker and journalist, and you used her to overcome your fear of speaking. And I'm thinking of how Marcus Aurelius starts off in Meditations with a list of, the things that he learned or the things he respects about other people. I mean, using role models of strength and overcoming. And I'm afraid that a lot of the role models that kids see, or at least a lot of what they're exposed to in kids' stories and kids' fiction, is about, kind of reinforces some of the ideas about you're fragile, you're easily harmed. So paying some attention to the stories that they're exposed to as well and the role models.
Absolutely. And actually also for kids to experience and even listen, there's evidence that kids who know their family history and who've heard their family story about how their grandparents met, that there were ups and that there were downs, that things maybe were difficult at points, that then they were, that maybe they got better, or they got worse. But actually seeing that arc of history and knowing that arc of history is very helpful to kids. So when they're sort of, in the storm in their own minds is happening, to understand that there are ups and downs, and that's normal. And also on top of that, though, having parents though who share, even like, this was really hard for me. And I think as parents, we feel often that we need to put on this sort of perfect face and that everything's fine. But even at studies of looking at 2-year-olds, when they see a parent trying to struggle to open a toy, that then they're much more likely to also struggle and persevere when they're given something a little bit difficult. And so I think we don't need to always make everything look so picture perfect from them, and that they can actually really benefit from seeing, that things have been sort of tough at times as well.
That's right, especially as you point to perfectionism as a thing that is really afflicting kids, and especially girls these days. I've heard that from a number of different sources. Okay, why don't we bring Lenore back in, because I think let's talk, the advice, a lot of the advice on good parenting, Lenore was really, pioneer, not that, of course, these ideas were known for a long time, but they were sort of forgotten by 2009. So Lenore, why don't you tell us, Samantha is a psychiatrist. She's an expert at helping individuals change, helping individuals in relationships get better dynamics. But Let Grow, we're trying to change the way millions and millions of kids are raised. We look at these rising graphs of depression, anxiety, fragility, and we think this has unbelievable ramifications for the country, let alone for mass suffering. So how can we do this at scale? What is mass suffering? Yeah. What is Let Grow doing about this? What advice do you or does Let Grow have? What resources do we have on the site for people on the call?
Wow, talk about the best question ever. So one of the things I realized early on about this problem is that it's very hard to be the only person who's brave enough to, okay, I am going to send my kid down the block to get the milk or let her ride her bike when nobody else is. And so we invented the Let Grow project, which is simple and free and available at letgrow.org. And this is what it is. It's a homework assignment that teachers give their students that simply says, go home and do something new on your own without your parents. And it's sort of it's sort of for the kid, but it's also for the parents as well, because it gives them the push that has been denied to them by this safetyism culture that you talk about so much in the coddling, that everything is seen through the lens of how could this hurt a kid? They could get snatched, they could fall off their bike, they could be lonely, sad, whatever. But if everybody in the class is letting their kids start to do something, or everyone in the school, or everyone in the district, we've had some districts do it, that's the best, because then kids are outside again. You're not the crazy mom. There's someone for the kids to play with outside. And then the kids start talking to each other about what they did. In some schools, they announce it over the loudspeaker, which I really like. And they, with elementary school kids, you can cut out this little leaf and it says, my project was, and how did it go? And what surprised me? And what do I want to do next? And those are pasted in the hallway. And then kids start saying like, wait a minute, he got to go to Dunkin' Donuts? Mom, can I go? Or can we go together? And really, the reason Samantha's book was so revelatory for me is because I felt like this was something important, and I could see parents changing. When the kid comes home with their donut, the parent is so proud, but it really was the action. They had to take this action and not just ruminate like, oh, bad things could happen, or is she ready, or am I a bad parent? Just at some point you have to do it. So we think if schools were doing this all over America, there'd be a lot of problems solved. Mass suffering.
So just to be clear, so I just put a link to the page on our site which has the details of the Let Grow project. So the kids don't just go home and do something. They agree with their parents, right? Yeah, okay.
Right.
So they agree with, they don't just, look, Mom, I cooked breakfast, I cooked dinner.
Really, and, I went to
burn down the house. But so the point, right? That's part of it is you negotiate you work out with the parents, and an amazing thing happens. An amazing thing happens when you let your kids do some of the errands and the jobs around the family. Like, your life gets easier. and your kids feel like they earned the money. In my family, the allowance is contingent on them doing chores, and boy, it actually really helps. So yes, as you say, it's a lot of it's for the parents. And so I put the link in because I think the second video on that page, there are 2 videos on that page, or several, but the second one, see how the Let Grow project transformed this middle school, is so powerful. And I think anyone who watches this video is going to be moved. And if you just send that video to the principal of your kid's elementary school or even middle school, I think it does a lot of work. Okay, so the Let Grow project is really our big, it's so simple, but it could change everything. And as you say, a lot of the effects are emergent. It's not just in your family. It really, this is a societal problem. And if you do send your kid out for the milk, friends of ours in Charlottesville, their 6-year-old, literally, the dad said, "Why don't you walk the 3 blocks back to our house by yourself?" The kid thought she could do it. And a stranger stopped her and called the police. I mean, sick stuff like this. So of course, people are afraid to let their kid, not because the kid's going to be abducted, but because of do-gooders are going to arrest them or something. So what else do we do? What else do we offer at Let Grow?
Well, you're making me want to jump to our legislative agenda for 1 second, our advocacy.
Let's do that, yeah.
Which is trying to change the laws. And actually, we thought about Virginia. Virginia is a tough state because its state law is good, but there are so many districts where they have cut and pasted this rule. No child is allowed outside or anywhere unattended, including their yard, until age 9.
Oh my God.
Which is just so terrible because it is making illegal exactly what we've just been talking about, the psychological health and well-being of an entire generation. Yeah. And it is codifying fear, right? If you're not afraid for your kid, well, we're afraid, and we're not going to let you be confident or trust that child or trust your neighbors or trust yourself. We're not going to let you be poor because you always have to be with your kid, waiting at the bus stop, walking them here and there. And so while Virginia was a tough one for us, we'll get to it at some point, but this year we're working in South Carolina, Nebraska, and Colorado to narrow the neglect law. So the neglect law doesn't just say anytime a kid is unsupervised or improperly supervised, that's neglect. No, it's only if a parent puts the child in actual, literal, statistically likely, obvious danger. And that means that you can still, you don't want people who are abusive or really careless. But if John, you sent your kid to get your lunch, I think she was 7. Was that correct?
Yeah, 6. Yeah.
6.
Yeah, my wife gave her lunch. She crossed the street and came in New York City, but she crossed the street, came to see me, and I have photos of it. I mean, just the joy on her face when she. Oh, actually, I'm getting all verklempt just remembering it. So what are the 3 states in which people on this call, if they could write their legislators or if they know people, know legislators, what are the 3 or 4 states where we're actually actively working on this?
Right. So this year it's South Carolina, Nebraska, and Colorado. And if you go to letgrow.org and you click on advocacy, there's a little place where you can write to us and tell us if you want to help us with it, if you know a state legislator. If you have a story, we don't like stories where people like the Charlottesville story, but that sort of is what makes our case. And there's the Charlottesville story where Charlottesville sounds like I'm talking about something else, but it's, not only was the kid stopped, but there are then parents who are probably listening now who are thinking, oh no, now I can't send my kid outside. I'd like to send her out. She's ready. I need somebody to go get the toilet paper, but I can't. And so we're also concerned about the second guessing that parents end up doing because they're worried about it. So those are the states, and just go to Let Grow. Even if you write to info@letgrow.org, we will end up seeing whatever you write and we will respond.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Yeah. And I really want to emphasize, the importance of parents speaking up, especially at the school district level. So I went to talk to the principal of my kid's school, PS3 here in Manhattan, and she, like all principals, she's overwhelmed, she's harried. While I was in there talking to her, the alarm went off. Everybody scrambled. There was an unaccounted for child. There was a child who hadn't shown up in his kindergarten class, although he had been, and of course the kid, he went to the bathroom. That's all it was. Yeah. He went to the bathroom, but everybody had to scramble because of this. Yeah. Yeah. So I was talking to her. I've talked to a number of principals, and they just feel like they get it from the parents no matter what they do. And if they try to have some more experience, some parents going to freak out about the risk. So it's really important for everybody on this call, if you have, and this is especially at the elementary and middle school levels, but to express your concern, to say you want more free range, you want your kids to take reasonable, they have to learn how to take reasonable risks. We don't want we don't want everybody supervising all the time. So leaders have to hear from our side, I'll say, before they have the permission really to change the way things are done. So, okay.
I was just going to ask a question of Samantha, because there are 3 psychology professors at Georgetown who are interested in studying the idea that American kids get their independence so late that the window when normal, throughout history, kids would have been, testing their limits and getting some street smarts from like ages, I don't know, 5 or 6 till 8, 9, 10. They don't get it then, and the window is shut. And after that, they end up overreacting to almost everything as if it's a risk because they never got to calibrate it during those years. Have you heard that?
I have heard that. I mean, I'm super curious about what you're talking about, but I have heard that. And because I think we're seeing, when there's anxiety, there's typically avoidance, right? Avoidance of anything that provokes that anxiety. And what do we know helps kids or anybody who has anxiety handle that? It's not avoidance, it's exposure to the thing that makes you, that makes you anxious. And so when those windows are closing, we're actually keep delaying the time. There's a lot of literature out there that actually your brain isn't fully formed now until you're 30, and so this idea though, that you are in this sort of endless adolescence, and so therefore it kind of green lights, I think sometimes parents, and that's obviously not the intention of those books, but it can green light this sort of facilitation of avoidance. I think that then parents feel like they need to intervene or they need to make decisions for their kids. And maybe are we depriving them of some of the autonomy and the agency that would really benefit them? And if that window's closed, how are we going to open it again? I mean, I'm not 100% sure it's possible to open it again.
Wait, let's assume it is possible to open again, because otherwise nobody's going to, the people are going to open the window and jump out, right?
So let's just make the distinction there. In psychology, there are critical periods where if the baby duckling isn't exposed to the mother duckling by this 14th hour, too late, that's it, it's over. That's a critical period. There are almost no critical periods in human development. The other term is sensitive period, which is a period in which something is easily learned. So for example, for phonology, if you're going to learn French or Spanish or any other language, if you're exposed to it before puberty, it's easy, you'll get it. But if not, you could get it, but it's just really hard. So I think that's what we're talking about here. And for the person in the chat who said that her son is 9.5 years old, I know of no evidence that 9.5 is outside the window. I think that start now. It's definitely not too late. When we wait until puberty, I think that there's a lot of reason to think that puberty is a very significant point in brain development when all the possibilities in early childhood lock down into one adult configuration. So it's very important that kids have a lot of this kind of experience before they start puberty. That's where I suspect the beginning of the window is. All right, so Lenore, we've got so many questions.
I've got questions.
To all of you talking, I'm sorry that I couldn't look at the chat. I can't pay attention to this, but I see there's a lot of good questions in the chat. So I hope Lenore and Andrea, you'll draw from that.
Teeing up number 1, which is basically a question about, there are a lot of social emotional skills learning curriculums in schools today. And I don't know if you're familiar with them or what you think about them. They happen in the classroom for the most part. Samantha, have you heard of them? I mean, you have kids. Are they going through these things?
Absolutely. I think that grows out of Peter Slove's work at Yale and looking at ways kids can identify their emotions. I think in general, it's very helpful for kids to be able to know what's going on and to feel their feelings. I might be a positive psychiatrist, but I'm a big fan actually of negative emotions as well. I think it's really important for kids to experience them, for kids to experience stress, discomfort, anxiety, uncertainty, and frustration and all the above. What we know is that actually asking kids, giving them a more expanded vocabulary around like the emotion they're feeling can help them. So it's rather than like, I feel bad or I feel good or I'm mad or I'm, sad, giving them the words and the language to kind of be able to label their emotions. My concern, the flip side of that though, is are we giving them sometimes too much? Are we overly fixating on their emotions and sometimes almost wound collecting or grievance gathering in some way that, it's very focused on well, I feel this and my emotion is that, which actually can be an on-ramp to rumination. So again, to get back to that self-distancing and reconstruing and reflecting rather than ruminating is really important. So I guess it's really around the questions that we're asking and how we're framing that SEL that is really kind of determining the benefits of it.
Right. John, have you heard about it or have you studied it at all?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a buzzword. And I think I share Samantha's sense that it could be a good idea, but given everything we know about how these things go, it probably is being implemented in ways that make kids worse off. That would be my guess, but if people know the research, I'd love to hear it.
I have to say, I was in a 7th grade class a couple months ago, and their SEL, social emotional learning project, was they were all given 3x5 cards, and they had to fill out 5 of them saying like, "You're terrific," or "I think you're smart," or "You're beautiful." Then
self-esteem.
But
that's not helpful.
They were going to be handed out randomly.
Oh God.
It's like, okay, I get what they're trying to do, but it just seems so clumsy.
I mean, that's the opposite of self-efficacy, right? Or that's the opposite of sort of what we're talking about relatedness and competence and autonomy, that's not helping that.
Right. All right. Another question that we got from somebody out there in the cybersphere is that her children are toddlers. And what are some of the applications of the let grow philosophy to early childhood? And Sam, I'll let you start.
The implications of let grow
to littler kids, like if you're, 3, 4, 5, 6, as opposed to.
Oh, I mean, I'm so glad. I mean, I only think I met you when my kids were about 7 or 8. I wish I had, met you at birth. I wish you'd been in the delivery room with me.
I'm glad I wasn't.
Free range delivery.
Right. Like,
maybe you should start there. But then I think it's so early, even like the moment that they can sort of roll over or do something or crawl or deliver something, how unbelievably, kids, when somebody drops something, they will sort of, wiggle over even or roll their way over there to try to help them pick it up. And so I think any opportunity that we can give them some sense of that competence and agency, that we should embrace it. And, you see it, you just see kids puff up like penguins the moment they do it. And it also then, you see it generalize into other domains as well. They get the milk or they walk the dog and then they want to do something else. And, certainly I think for stressed out parents also, I mean, the upside is it can make our lives a lot easier, but even giving kids just those little tasks to do things, that it's so helpful rather than feeling like we're always breaking our backs, kind of trying to bend over to make sure that everything's perfect.
Bend over literally. I mean, that's funny that it's that phrase, you got a toddler, you're bending over, right?
Yeah.
And I would add the incredible importance of having lots and lots of frustration. My wife and I were big fans. Somebody gave us this book, 1, 2, 3 Magic, which uses just basic, simple behaviorist techniques to, rather than saying, "Please, I've asked you so many times to do this," you just count them, 1, 2, 3 time out. So it's simple behaviorism. It works like a charm. But there's a line somewhere in either the book by Phelan or something he said, your job is to be sure you frustrate your child every day, because it's incredibly important that they learn. Yeah.
It'll work.
But it's incredibly important that they face a lot of frustration, because 1, that will spur them to try to overcome it. But 2, it's really, really important to sometimes be frustrated and not get your way and not be able to solve it. Now, if that's all your experience, you get learned helplessness. But kids need to be able to learn to experience both frustration and I would even say injustice, because we all are so biased. We all think we're right 90 to 100% of the time. We do have to learn to sometimes live with adverse decisions where somehow it went against us and we think it's unfair, but you know what? Life goes on. And so, so I think sort of a philosophy of, kids need a lot of experiences, including some negative ones, and they'll grow from them. That I think is what if I had known Lenore back when my kids were toddlers, that's what I would have done more of.
Can I add something in there, Lenore, as well? It just made me think when John was saying that, how important it is. Like, we always assume that self-confidence is good and that self-doubt is bad. And it actually, though, it is good to be exposed to, I think, those frustrating experiences where you doubt your strategy and then you think of another one. In addition to that, I'm thinking of Kelly Lambert's work. I think she's at the University of Richmond, where she studies rats, and she calls one group of her rats the trust fund rats, and she gives them a Fruit Loop embedded in this, underneath all of this hay. I'm sorry, she gives the trust fund rats the Fruit Loop on a silver tray, essentially. And then the regular rats just have to go and forage for it and dig through their bedding to get their Fruit Loop. And then when they're challenged again, the trust fund rats completely give up when they're asked to find something or to swim somewhere. Apparently they really dislike swimming, but they can swim. But the rats who've been trained to forage and had some difficulty and who are then have some sense of self-efficacy are actually far more resilient. And I'm not comparing children to rats, but well, maybe I am.
We're all families.
Right. So first of all, I love the idea of trust fund rats. I think I've known some. And secondly, what we're talking about with the idea of frustration, betrayal, not always getting your way, having to make things work, that happens in play, which is something that we really have taken out of kids' lives. We think kids have a lot of play because they have 4 afternoons of soccer practice and 2 games on the weekend. And that's a skill that they're learning. It's soccer, it's how to kick the ball and win. But what you learn in free play, when it's just kids playing with each other, mixed ages, is so many of these things that we were just talking about. You're not always going to get your way. Sometimes you have to explain the game 1,000 times. So you're learning communication skills. Was the ball in or out? I think it was out. You say it was in. I want to keep going. That's compromise. And what Peter Gray, another co-founder of Let Grow, recommends is mixed ages. I mean, throughout history, until very recently, we didn't segregate kids by only the 5-year-olds are with the 5-year-olds and the 7-year-olds are with the 7-year-olds. It's new. And what it doesn't allow is I was talking to a guy who still remembers the joy when he was a 12-year-old. He had, for some reason, he was playing soccer with these little kids. And when the kid would kick the ball, the 5-year-old kicks the ball and hits him in the chest, he'd go, oh, as if it was, the strongest, as if that guy was Superman. And the 5-year-old was ecstatic, but so was the 12-year-old, because he got to be a cool older guy, kind of like a dad, a little empathy building there. And so, you asked John earlier, a softball question, but I appreciated it. What kinds of things Let Grow has for schools? We not only have the Let Grow project, we recommend that schools offer free play before or after school for a couple hours, a day, 2 days, 5 days a week, where adults don't plan the activities, they don't solve the spats, they sit in the corner with an EpiPen, and the kids just make their own fun, preferably with some balls and Amazon boxes out there. But I'd love you two to even think about what happens when there's less free play in kids' lives.
Well, I think it's exactly as you said. We're a biological species that evolved with what's called experience expectant development. So our genes don't actually have that much information. Our genes create a brain which evolved in a climate in which it was going to get certain patterns of light and nutrients. And that's why we don't make vitamin C ourselves, because our evolutionary history, we know that we're going to encounter vitamin C. And then, when people went out to sea and they didn't have vitamin C, they got scurvy. And I would say in the same way, the human brain evolved to have lots and lots and lots of play and risk-taking and conflict and all that stuff. And then, in the name of helping them, I suppose, we said, no more of that, it's dangerous. Why don't you do math instead from the time you're 4? And basically, we've given our kids scurvy. We've given them emotional scurvy by depriving of the nutrients they most need and stuffing them full of things they don't need, like math. They do not need math until, certainly until they're 8 or 9. They just don't need to be doing it. And so much homework, even in kindergarten and 1st grade. What they need is play.
I'm going and getting the URL for emotional scurvy right after. Don't anybody else take it? Come on, that's not
that was
fair.
a Rolling Stones album, I think. Yeah.
Right, or should be. Yeah, Samantha, what?
No, but absolutely. And I think just without that experience of play and negotiation and coordination and collaboration, I think that you can sort of draw a direct line from that to a lot of the polarization that we're seeing today. And, we often talk about that marshmallow study and wait, if your kid could resist the marshmallow, then they're going to go on to be to greatness. But, looking at sort of some newer marshmallow studies, we also know that kids who have resources, though, are much more likely to be able to resist that marshmallow. So there were other factors that were involved. Kids who had strategies to resist the marshmallow were better at it, who knew how to cover it, who would turn their backs on it and sing. But also kids who were doing it knowing they had a partner, that they were also much more likely to resist the marshmallow. So I think we think of things like self-control as something very individual, and it's something that's just like, again, all in your own head. But actually, when you're doing something where somebody else will, be affected by that there's a collaboration, there's a shared experience, it can also really influence how we feel. I know probably a lot of people have made some New Year's resolutions, and what do we know that instead of people focusing typically on what makes them, things they want to get rid of in their lives, what if they do something they enjoy, something that's fun, and especially if they do something with somebody else, that they're much more likely to follow through, and they're actually much more likely to report satisfaction with their lives a year later when there's something they're doing it with another person. So rather than just having this sort of individual self-focused behaviors, how can we expand outwards? And I think play helps us, that play that we do as a child really, I think, helps us throughout our lives.
Right. And also, you were talking earlier about how incredibly lonely people are feeling, right? And isolated. And obviously, if you're doing something in real life with another person, that's the opposite. That's why I rang my neighbor's bell. It's literally because of your advice. It's like, okay, this will be fun. And it was.
The cure for emotional scurvy. Yes.
All right. Now we need a bottle. Let's see. Somebody else is asking, what's a good balance of focused attention versus constructive boredom for kids of different ages? I'm going to throw that to you guys if you understand what the question really means. Focused attention. I think she must mean like, how much should we be entertaining our kids maybe, or engaging them, versus the kid being bored and then doing something other than scrolling through Instagram. Mm-hmm. So boredom. How do you create boredom that is not immediately fed by something electronic?
Yeah. So yeah, I think part of what's going on here. So I only know a little bit about Montessori education, but what little I know, it makes sense to me, which is, my kids are bored in New York City public schools. They're bored in a lot of their classes. That's not the way we evolved to learn. You certainly want kids to develop interests and then pursue them with intrinsic motivation. So I think intrinsic motivation is a real key here. I do, from doing a little bit of research on whether homework helps, I do believe that by middle school, it does make sense that kids are really focused on learning skills, and there's a lot of that. But I think we're talking about sensitive periods. I think from about the age of 4 or 5 through about 10 or 11, they're incredibly social and focused on playing with other kids, and that's what they need most. And so I think for us to give them, it's fine to take piano lessons and things like that, but most of their time, I think, should be spent doing more exploratory things. Now, the problem is, if there's a screen available, boom, it's over. That's all there is. There's nothing as attractive as a screen. And my wife and I found when we would, we'd go on vacation, and there'd be all these things to do. And if the kids had access to a screen, that was it. That's all they do. And so we would have to say, like, none, really severe restrictions on access to them. So of course, this is the conflict in every family. But I think once you see, it's not that like the screen is going to rot their mind. The screen is going to stuff them full of like styrofoam or something that has no nutrient value. It doesn't do anything. I'm exaggerating. Obviously, they do learn some things, but the point is, yes, the screens are the enemy of any other sort of exploratory behavior.
Yeah, I call them the vampires of vitality in the book. It is sort of this emotional.
There's another website. I'm going to get that right now. Vampires of vitality versus emotional scurvy, tonight at 7.
It's so I think the focused attention question, I'm not sure if also this relates to that concept of flow that Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, who recently passed away, spoke about, where when we're doing effortful experiences, where we're not effort sparing experiences, where we're sort of pushed to the brink of our ability, and we're not really thinking at all. Actually, our brains sort of are just so engaged, and our bodies are engaged, and whatever the task is at hand. Obviously, athletics is one example, maybe playing the piano, it could be cooking, it could be baking, it could be gardening, it could be singing, whatever that might be. And I think giving our kids some of those opportunities for flow, I think it's good for our own brains as adults, but also that sense of flow where you really lose sense of time. Play is a perfect example where one does, like where a child, is just building those blocks or doing something, anything I think that doesn't have a battery or that some kind of lights that are blinking back at you. And certainly play with another child is, where you just kind of can't call them in. Being outdoors also is so critical and important. Interesting study looking at kids who went to the mall with their parent versus those who spent time outdoors, and how they had that sort of boost in a sense of fulfillment by being outside was so important. And then lastly, just to think about that, some of the research in strengths, and how I know that viacharacter.org, and I'll put that in the chat, has an adolescent and a child strength survey, and asking your kids then, once they see what their top strengths are, and it might be your strength of creativity or perseverance or curiosity, and then asking them to use their strength maybe in a new way. How could you use your, strength of love of beauty today? And it also, I think, can build that sense of maybe if it's around some action or some like self-efficacy inducing action, that could be a helpful way to kind of boost that self-focused attention for them.
Can we just define self-efficacy for 1 second? It's such a buzzword, and I'm going to give it to either of you. You're both.
Sure, it's just the belief that you're capable of doing something. So if you have, homework self-efficacy, or, fixing the refrigerator self-efficacy, or navigating social situations self-efficacy, it's just the belief that you can do something. And to the extent that we treat kids like, oh, can opener, that's dangerous. Now they don't have can opener self-efficacy. They don't have kitchen self-efficacy.
I did talk to a 7th grader recently when I was visiting that class, who for her Let Grow project was going to slice an apple with a sharp knife. First time. And then the mother,
how old was she?
The last 7th grade, that's 12 or 13
Oh,
years old.
God.
And the mom swooped in at the last moment and said, here, no, let me do that for you.
Yeah, that's right. This is what you call worst first thinking. Yes, it's possible that she'll cut off her finger. Therefore, let's not let her ever use a knife.
Someday, John, we're going to make a video for the Let Grow website that shows how hard it is to chop off your finger with a knife. My guess is that it's hard, right? Isn't it? I mean, and you can't really use a fake hand. So I've been thinking about this.
Lenore, I recommend against making this video.
Oh, all right. On record.
It's a good joke, but let's not make the video.
We get a lot of hits. Okay, last question before we sum things up. And this really is more for Samantha, which is that, there's a lot of diagnosing of ADD and OCD and anxiety and you name it. But I was going to say vegetable soup, but that's not it. Alphabet soup. And people looking for a quick medical prescription, maybe rather than a here's how to change your life prescription. What are you seeing and what do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot of sort of diagnoses being handed out, and then a lot of prescriptions for medication. And I'm not to say that that's, always wrong at all. There's certainly, occasions for that. But at the same time, not conflating one's identity with a diagnosis is really important. We actually even know around the language people use that if you call somebody a schizophrenic versus somebody who is with schizophrenia, it actually changes the way that we treat that person. And I think we have to be really careful with that language and not conflating, again, even a student's accomplishment with their identity, and really thinking about their effort that they put into things rather than like sort of whatever the outcome is. That we're sort of overly obsessed with, even is your identity sort of where you got into college or not? And I think for kids who are applying out, it's so unbelievably stressful. And also thinking, I mean, they've got their own self-imposed perfectionism, but also if they feel that their parents are also projecting that onto them. And really thinking about how can you even find wellness within illness. Again, as I said, positive mental health is the absence of symptoms or even a diagnosis. It's really about having, quality and positive experiences and beliefs and feelings. And throughout, any way that one can cultivate that is really important. And rather than just sort of, I think, trying to feel less bad or have fewer symptoms, is actually what are you cultivating in an everyday way to help build self-efficacy and to help build what we talked about, that sense of autonomy, relatedness, and competence.
It's so interesting, right? I just want to say that it sounds like, the doing is what changes you, right? I mean, I hear from parents who say like they want their kids to find purpose, and who doesn't? We all want to find purpose, but you can't go out like, where's my purpose? You do things and then things start resonating for you, or that seems dumb, but this is really interesting, and you find them. And that's why, one of Let Grow's tenets is that kids need some free time just to noodle around, especially if they're not online, but just doing some stuff and seeing what interests them. Wordsworth said the child is father to the man. You're your kid first, and sometimes your interests pull you through the rest of your life.
And also, though, to add to that, though, too, is if there is a kid who's has something or has ADHD or whatever that is, what are the ways? How could that kid advise another kid who's been diagnosed with that? Empowering them to be helpful, for their experiences to be helpful, even to a younger kid. I agree with you about that intergenerational point that you made earlier, and having kids of all ages, but actually seeing how you could contribute. Well, this is what really helped me. This strategy really helped me focus, on my homework. Maybe this would help you too. And even within schools, if they could do some, more tutoring within. And I know because of COVID, there's been less, interaction between the different grades, but even those big brother, big sister, older kid interaction interactions, I think, are invaluable, and where you're really seeing this kind of back and forth input. And it's so empowering for both kids who are engaged in that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 1:10 here on the East Coast. I think we should close up now. And I thought we'll just let's have the three of us each offer a closing comment or thought. I'll start, and then Samantha, and then we'll have Lenore close out as the host and as the president of Let Grow.
Oh.
And so I'll offer my thought is this. I'm a social psychologist, and I'm writing a book now on how social media is really putting, I think, our democracy in grave danger. I'm really focused on the ways that we're all influenced by each other, and social media has hyper-connected us in ways that are mostly bad, although some good and sometimes. And so to bring it to this conversation, I think what we've seen from the beginning with Let Grow is that lots, and maybe even most parents agree with us, or at least are Let Grow curious, let's say. And yet the social fears, if you're the mom who seems to be not careful with your kids, you'll be shamed, you'll be shunned even. The social forces are so powerful, but we're such social creatures. We're always attending to what we think the average person around us thinks. And if we are now in an age of extraordinary self-censorship, people are afraid to speak about a vast variety of topics, even leaving aside politics, this topic, child rearing. So it's really important that you speak up. It's really important that you not just be a victim buffeted by these social pressures to raise kids in a bad way that's harmful for the kids, that you speak up and say, well, actually, our kids need this kind of experience. I would say, I buy multiple copies of Lenore's book, Free Range Kids, and I give it to, whenever I have friends or people who have young kids, I give it out. It's incredibly powerful when you have a few other parents who share the philosophy, because now the social forces are really with you. You have a group, and the kids all are exposed to different norms. So that's my closing comment. Just really attend to the power of these social forces and use them for good. Samantha?
I'm reminded that Elizabeth Stone quote about making the decision to have a child. It is momentous. It is to decide forever to have your heart go walking around outside your body. And just how difficult it is sometimes, and as parents, how hard it is to, and especially when it's against the tide, and this is, you're saying, especially when the norms aren't that way, that how hard it is to make these decisions. That's why I'm so grateful for Let Grow, that has created, I think, actually not just, we know the why, but also the how that's there. Actually, how can you empower parents to actually empower their kids to honestly seek and find, I think, like vitality, and to vitalize those around them. And this idea that happiness really isn't in your head, it's in your actions, it's, and your connections, and how you're contributing to others. And any opportunity starting at a really early age that we can encourage our kids to do that. And I think, Let Grow has a blueprint on that. And I just want to thank all of you for allowing me to participate in this. And I admire John and Lenore and all of what you do. And I'm happy to bask in your brilliance every day.
Well, we will be doing that with our board meetings, our exciting board meetings ahead. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. I really want to thank John and Samantha. I think I have 1 minute left. So let me just tell you that Let Grow is dedicated, as I think you've understood from this, to making it easy, normal, and legal to give our kids back some of this independence that we've been talking about. I encourage you to visit us at Let Grow, not Let It Grow, not Let's Go, it's letgrow.org. If you want to find that community John is talking about, where people can talk to each other and admit, I let my 7-year-old go get me my lunch, that's our webpage, our Facebook page called Raising Independent Kids. We've got a blog, we take donations, of course, and we want to hear your stories. So please visit us at Let Grow. You'll be getting this email soon with all sorts of links. More links that you can believe are in one simple email. And I will let you know when our next webinar is, even though it probably can't hold a candle to this one. So thank you very much, and have a great and independent day.